Hi, this is Burr Stewart, and today's video is a blow-by-blow, literally, description of how to make easy scenery. We're going to take a look at this one section of my layout that has what Lance Mintheim might call negative space. It's just a hillside covered with trees, and it goes between 1 yard and one bridge, and it creates a great effect that we're modeling the outdoors. It was one of the first parts of the layout that I scenicked way back 25, 30 years ago, because it was really easy to make a bunch of fir trees and just stick them in some hunks of foam and make that hillside. But a friend came to me and said, "Would you have any use for an icing platform?" And I said, "Well, maybe I could, because I have this berry packing plant. See it there on the wall? And we really should have a way of icing the iced refrigerator cars." So as you see there, what we did was to shove the scenery back a little bit and put this loading dock that he built right in that hillside. And I'm very glad we did, because now we have a much more interesting operation in the Burlington yard, where we have to first ice the reefers before we can spot them at the berry packing plant. So the first thing I did was to take the hillside off of the plywood that it was resting on. And I should mention this is a lift-out piece of scenery, because I have electrical outlets for the house along the wall there. And I removed that foam piece and scraped off all the remnants of the glue that had been holding the foam to the plywood lift-out. And here you see the lift-out itself. And I marked where the hill had to be cut for the houses in the back of the ice chest. And you can see I cut the foam off and removed those little insets. And this allowed us to back the ice house up, and you can see it in position here, far enough back that we could get a track in there. See, there's the ice house up against those little cutouts. And now we're going to test and see if there's enough room for a piece of track. First, I have to get the stair up. There's a piece of track. Yeah. We'll take a car and make sure that the clearances work right. Looks good. I think we have a plan. We need to install a switch and a piece of track. First, we have to get those live limestone or jennies out of the way, because we're going to be doing a lot of construction work here, and we don't want the problem of a bunch of spilled limestone all over the place. You saw this action in an earlier video on my channel, so I sped it up for this video, just for you to see that we did indeed get to do a little switching as part of this project. Later in the video, we'll have some additional switching when we put these cars back. But first, we have to get the scenery construction done. I'm using a proto throttle there just for the fun of it. And you can see the electrical panels that I've painted over on the backdrop there. All right, so step one was we had to cut the lift-out plywood a little bit and glue that part down to be permanent. It's a little hard to explain why, but it doesn't matter. And then I also needed to remove this piece of Code 55 flex track that I had been using as a spur on this corner of the Burlington yard. And it didn't take very long to do that. I glued down my track with something called liquid latex, which is kind of like a rubber band material in liquid form. And what's nice about it is, you can see here, it's easy to remove track because it isn't a hard glue, it's kind of a rubbery glue. There are plenty of other great ways to attach track, but this is the one I've used. The other thing I like about it is that it's not, when it dries, it's not water soluble, which means that when you apply the white glue for ballasting, it doesn't make the track come unglued. So the next thing we did was to insert a track switch or a turnout in the yard lead there. We used a microengineering number 5 left hand because it matched the curve pretty well. And then we came in and glued the main part of the icing platform track. You can see we've got it weighted down. The white stuff is the liquid latex that I just applied. And that's all looking pretty good. You can see the blue foam sticking out of the scenery. We'll fix that when we go to painting it in a later step. And that's looking good. We let that dry 8 hours or more, and then we do some testing. Now, you've seen this shot in my earlier video too, because I failed to remove that truck and made a mess. As we'll find out later, I should have put a better key of some kind there. Here's the part you remember from before. Yeah, I should have removed that truck. Anyway, this is the sort of final test of, are we sure this is going to work okay? So I pulled the plywood in place, stuck the ice house there in the little slots that we made in the scenery for it. It looks really great. It doesn't necessarily make sense. You wouldn't have those buildings back into the middle of a forest, but that's okay. Now, like I say, I should have had better keyframes on this plywood. I have to fuss with it to get it to work. And after this experiment, I did a little bit of filing of the rails to make sure they had a little more flexibility to them, to their alignment. Yeah, this is looking great. Yep. Really great. So that's the overall view of it, but we haven't fixed the scenery yet. We haven't painted the bottom. So that's our next step. You see I've got a plastic bag there with some paint in it. And we're looking at the setup there with the berry packing plant on the wall. And the ice house there on the left with a switch that will allow us to switch cars in and out of there and then shove them to the correct loading dock on Bo Edison Foods. Very nice. So now we can set the camera up in position and do our paint job. First thing we're going to do is remove that truck. And we'll put this aside. You don't have to go far, just far enough to do the painting. And of course, the first thing you do is take 1.5-inch masking tape and put it down on the flex track, because we don't really want any paint getting in our track. I previously spray painted this track so that it would have a good color and the rails would not be shiny and all that sort of thing. But this is to protect the ties in the flex track. You could do the painting without this masking tape, but it would just take a lot longer because you have to be very, very meticulous about not getting the paint on the ties. I'd rather just be able to slobber the paint on and not worry about the track. I'll put that aside for the moment. And we'll vacuum this up before we paint. Make sure it's nice and smooth. Now I'm shaking up the paint, but I want to mention that if you keep your paint in a plastic bag, it'll last longer because it doesn't oxidize as much. The air has a way of getting through little tiny holes in the lid. And I always usually take a little paint off the lid too, just to keep it from getting too thick. But that's a matter of choice. So many things are a matter of choice, like how you hold your brush. You hold it like a pencil or a toothbrush. What do? It doesn't matter. Now, I could have put masking tape on the backdrop too, but it doesn't matter there because it's covered up with scenery, so I didn't bother. It looks like there's a little air gap there too, so it wasn't hard. Now, if we were being more careful, I would have put a drop cloth down on these other finished tracks. But what I'm really showing you here is you can do scenery work pretty quick once you get going with it. I think I have a couple of other videos showing small pieces of scenery modifications that you can take a look at. I'll put the links in the description below to some of my earlier scenery videos. But I mainly wanted to say, don't wait to start scenery. Get going. It's not that hard. You just put down some kind of a brown paint and you sprinkle stuff on it, and before you know it, it's good. And the other thing I'll mention here is I'm using this latex paint as glue for the styrofoam, which I had earlier, in the previous version, I had glued that styrofoam to the plywood with some sort of caulk, what do you call it? Some sort of a caulk glue, but it's really not necessary. Latex paint is a great glue. I want to make sure that it's held down properly. I don't have a good way of clamping it, so I put some weights on the hillside just to make it a little heavier. That's one trouble with foam, is it's so lightweight. You need to figure that out, how to hold it to things. So now that we've got our piece of foam in place, we can go around and get rid of all these exposed blue foam areas. Not hard to do. And this gives us the advantage of also we can put a little extra paint on the flat surface too, which will be good for holding the dirt and grass that we'll put down in a minute. And, on the other side, in between the tracks, this is debatable. Would this all be ballast or would there be some grass there? It's just easy since I already put the masking on and just throw a little paint in there around the edges of the ground throws. I should have masked those ground throws too. And there I'm making a little transition to the other scenery, just sort of a feathering effect. There. That wasn't too bad. Now, right away, we want to put down the ground foam. I'm just using stock Woodland Scenics dirt blend here. I start with that to have sort of an underlayment of dirt, and then I bring in the green. So it'll be a mottled effect, which you would always see in real life. Then the green is going on top of the dirt so that when we vacuum it up, we'll have an irregular pattern of color, which is what you always see in the real world. On the right-hand side of those tracks, you can see a little finished scenery that also has some bushes. I didn't do any bushes today, but we'll come back and do that some other time. The main thing here is I'm just taking advantage of this wet paint. See, you don't have to do this at this stage, but then you would have to come back and apply some kind of glue to glue down this grass. And of course, if you wanted to do static grass, I suppose you could do static grass on this wet paint too. I never thought of trying that. That tree was in the way, so I got rid of it. Now, there's one problem with this, which is that those vertical cliffs look kind of silly. So we'll use the blowing on a card method. You just put a little of it on the card and blow it onto the side of that hill. And since the paint is wet on the side of the hill, it'll stick to it. See how that just toned down that? It just tones down that vertical paint. I still need to do it a little bit more on the left. Now, you might say this is totally unrealistic to have these vertical cliffs, and you're right. But I can always come back and fix that sometime. All I wanted to do is create the space for that icing platform, which required those two cutouts. And you can't really even see the scenery behind the houses on the icing platform. But if it bothered somebody enough, I would be happy to say, yeah, go ahead and carve that scenery up and make it look more realistic. The whole theme of this video is you can get scenery done really fast, And if you want it perfect, you can always go back and fix it later. But the main thing is to not have exposed blue foam and exposed plywood, which is what we had before. And now we're going to have, when this dries, a really nice little scene here. And, you know, if you're ever here someday, you can complain to me about the fact that the scenery behind those houses on the ice dock doesn't look realistic. Let's see. Got this down. Yeah, I tested it one more time. It seemed like the foam was doing okay resting on the paint. So the next thing to do, of course, after you've given a few hours for the paint to set, is to remove that masking tape. I meant to do it a couple hours after the painting, but I forgot and then ended up coming down the next day. I was a little bit worried that the paint would have dried so hard that I would have a new project to remove masking tape, but it turned out okay. So that's good. Now the most important step is taking an old stocking, sock of some kind, and putting it in the vacuum cleaner nozzle so that you can recover all of the unglued ground foam. So that's what we're doing here. We're just sucking up anything that didn't stick to the glue. And remember, this is 2 days later that I'm doing this. 2 days after I applied the glue. So the paint is nice and dry at this point. And I'm just kind of knocking it a little bit. That's my shaking is just to knock it loose. Make sure everything comes loose that is loose. And all of this extra ground foam is going up into that stocking in the vacuum tube, and we'll recover it shortly. Nice. I keep one of these jars of scenic material for leftovers. See how much of a big bunch of stuff is in there? And we can just put it right back in there. And, you know, I know it makes me look like I'm a hoarder or something, but why throw away perfectly good scenery material? There, see, look at all that. I just got all that back. Very nice. Those lids are hard to put on. Now, the other thing I'd like to do is mix it up so that I don't just get that one color the next time I go and use this scenery shaker. Now we'll just make one little pass to make sure we got things off the track. Nothing we missed. I didn't collect that, but there wasn't very much there. Just one final pass. Now I'm getting rid of the weights and declaring victory on the scenery. Now, obviously, like I said, we could put in bushes, we can do all kinds of things, but we're always in a big hurry here because it's just such a big layout with so many things going on. Look, that turned out pretty well. Who knew that that was bare plywood? Another little check to make sure there's nothing underneath the lift out. Opportunity to vacuum the top of the background scenery there. I'm really not happy about these two wires that I have to fuss with. I should have put a couple of, they're much more elegant solutions to how to power that track. This is just what I did in a hurry. And someday I'll get one of those little, they make a thing kind of like a snap for your clothing that you can just snap one of these lift outs down into it, and it also provides the electrical route. Yeah, that looks good. Stick the dock in there. I don't think I'll glue that down because it's better for it to be frangible. If somebody kicks it with their finger or whatever, it'd be better for it to move than for it to break. And we'll get that engine back on the track, and now we can do some operations. Testing. See if it works. I'm happy. Yeah, it looks really great. It still gives the idea of the hillside. We didn't lose too much by pushing that hill back the 2.5 inches or whatever it was. And now we can feed that berry picking plant with iced reefers. I love it. You can see I still haven't cleaned up the mess from the ground cover canisters and pliers and brushes, pencils, you name it. We'll get all that cleaned up. Next time you see a video of this layout, you'll never know what happened. So there's the overall view. That looks very good. Now, before we can do the testing of the track, we have to clean the top of the rails. And a lot of things you can use for this. I'm using a piece of wood right now. The conventional bright boys are supposedly a little too, they're a little too much abrasive. So they scratch the top of the rail. And the idea is a piece of wood will keep the top of the rail smooth without deep micro grooves. I cleaned this track a few times. I kept looking at it to see if I cleaned enough. I couldn't really tell. I'm working on the switch over there. Now this time I'm not bothering with the proto throttle. I just want to get the job done. I mentioned in the other video that this engine has too much momentum set in it, which I still haven't fixed, but I will. Now, unfortunately, since I didn't have a good key, that wasn't quite lined up, and I think the engine even derailed when it went over that gap. But there was also an electrical issue with the track there. Yeah, it derailed the back truck. I should have fixed it right then, but instead I pulled some cars on, and you'll see what happens. Uh-oh, wait for it. Bang! Now, it turns out there's a second refrigerator car on that track, so we decided to go down and pick that up too, so we would be testing it with 2 cars, not 1. Also, I like the idea of a 40 and a 50-foot reefer. Bang! Whoops, it didn't couple up. And that's because I don't do a good enough job of maintaining all my couplers. Bang! They should be nice and loose, the knuckles, so that they couple right up. And that's an operation you probably wouldn't see on a real railroad, smashing 2 cars together to make sure they couple. That would just probably break the couplers on a real railroad. Put on the bell so that make sure the workers in that plant knew that we were going by. Now this is a demonstration of if you want to derail some cars, just set up a gap between tracks that's offset. Look at that. 3 out of 4 trucks came right off the track, for crying out loud. So I went back and fussed with it a little bit, and I realized that I'm going to need to put a better key in there somehow. Now, obviously, I could install rail joiners there too. That would be okay, but just makes it a little more complicated to lift that lift out up. Oh, we tried it again. Seems to have worked fine. The main thing is that the power is hooked up to that track, so it works, and it's clean. The track is clean. So we like that, and we'll spot these reefers at the icing house. So I think we'll test the other end also. Remember we had a problem with the gap up there? This is the part of the video where we degenerate from how to build scenery to how to have fun playing with trains. Seems to me I should have the bell on for this move too. At some point while I was doing this, I realized that there would be absolutely no reason to spot a mechanical refrigerator car at the ice platform. That longer car is obviously a mechanical car because it doesn't have the ice hatches on top. But it does need to be spotted next into the berry packing plant, so for now I'll tolerate it since I did want to experiment with a longer car, make sure it went around the corners and so forth. This video, a lot of the shots are sped up. Sometimes twice real time, sometimes 3 or 4 times. But you can tell this is sped up about 2 times, I think. Well, you know what we have to do next is we have to put away those limestone jennies that were loaded in the mine there. So we'll do that now. Bang! You know, 2 toots for moving forward. The Great Northern ran their Jeeps long hood forward, so that's why we did that. I mentioned that in the other video. The jennies coupled up to some other cars in the yard, so we'll have to uncouple them first before we can proceed. Uncoupling with an uncoupling pick is easy, right? All right, we got that done. And now we're just going to shove our cars back into the mine there in the back. It doesn't really look like a mine, it just looks like a white cliff. I guess that's another project we'll have to do someday is build a mine structure of some kind. For now, I just tell people that the mine is back around the corner. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, he's not modeling the Minnesota Iron Range. Why is he running jennies? But it turns out in the 70s, quite a few of the older jennies from the Minnesota area were used out here in the Pacific Northwest for various rock moving jobs. And one of them was the Milwaukee Limestone Junction branch up near Bellingham. And I kind of borrowed from that idea. And also some copper ore came down from British Columbia to the smelter at Asarco in ore jennies. And there were other things that also used them. So it's not as established a business as the iron ore was, but it's still something that's realistic for a model railroad of the Pacific Northwest to have a few of these ore jennies in operation. Yeah, that icing plant looks like it's always been there, doesn't it? We do need to ballast the track and make it dirty around there. But I'm very pleased with how this turned out. And I hope you learned a few things about how to make scenery along the way. And if you like horn honking, model railroading is a good hobby. You can just blow your horn anytime you want. Bang! Couple into cars, honk, honk, honk your horn. I love it. One toot means we stopped. 3 toots means we're backing up. You know that already, but if you didn't, now you do. Yeah, I also should put a switch machine in that new switch that we just installed, but it's one of these finger flick switches, so it works okay by itself. Well, that's how easy it is to make a change to your scenery, and hope you learned something from this video. And for the moment, this is Burr Stewart, wishing you much fun with trains.